Hello, everyone. For those of you just joining us, welcome to the RadicalxChange Annual Conference. Our next session will be Shaping the Future of Urbanism by Adopting Radical Models. I'll turn it over to you, Natalia, to introduce yourselves, the panelists, and begin.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Well, it's you can see I'm here from sunny Barcelona. It's a little late at night today, but we're very excited to talk about this great panel. There's so much to tackle, so much to do, especially when we talk about urban renewal, when we talk about design, when we talk about figuring out citizens, especially in the area between rural, urban, and regional. I'm an urban planner by background, so this is very passionate for me. Something that I've tried to strive for to make the right changes. So, today many nations actually across the world have failed at one time or another in creating better cities and urban ecosystems. And as such, the urbanization trends are complex and multifaceted, spanning everything from urban planning, investment, and informal economies. So for cities and towns to function in the future, I think everyone needs to have a voice, right? We all are talking about how important it is to have the citizen at the center and how we can encourage for citizens to really engage in civic processes that allow collaboration across all differences. To revitalize the democracy at RadicalxChange, we really are desperately looking for a variety of opinions, a variety of ideas, to be able to update our basic mechanisms for collective decision-making, resource sharing. This is what RadicalxChange ideas and models are really striving for. And we're so happy to be able to be joined by the amazing panels that we have today. We'll go ahead and have presentations that will last between 15 and 20 minutes from our panelists. And then we're going to open it up for questions, debate, discussion, brainstorming. How do we figure out great feedback and let our panelists take that back and look at how we as an organization, we as a community can make a difference. I want to make a point that RadicalxChange has 70 chapters across the world in the US and globally. And this is just in the last year. So that's really important. We're really making a difference, putting ground, making sure that we're talking locally, that our cities and towns and regions are actually very much involved. So first we're going to get to speak will be Joe Lambke. Joe is an architect and founder of Animate. He is, which is a full-service architecture firm. Love it. My father's an architect, which is where I get the urban planning from. So Animate is currently designing mixed community buildings and reinventing urban zoning regulations, especially with an organization called kidscity.org. Our mechanism in designing the next generation for metropolises is quite, looking at fast travel services with infinitetransit.com. Getting kids involved is key. His experience includes designing buildings such as award-winning theory and computing sciences building research with the Santa Fe Institute and teaching as a studio professor at Illinois Institute of Technology. So when he's not thinking about intricacies of people in space, he's enjoying music and surfing and cycling and listening, actually, which is always good. As a planner, as an architect, you really have to be able to listen to folks. So, after him, we have Renato Cymbalista. He's an architect and an urban planner as well. He holds a PhD in architecture from the University of Sao Paulo, Brazil. And a PhD in history from Universität Campinas, Brazil. He's a professor in the Department of History of Architecture and Urbanism at the School of Architecture for Sao Paulo. He coordinates the research group, Sites of Memory and Conscience, and the Lab for Other Urbanisms at the University of Sao Paulo. He's the president of Instituto Pólis. He sits in the board of Casa de Povo, Sao Paulo, and Centro de Preservação Cultural of the University of Sao Paulo. He's an associate of the Goethe Institute of Sao Paulo as well. Lots of amazing things happening here. If we look at our panelists for Europe, US, Brazil, it's such a rich dynamic. So Hans Bouwknegt is digital strategist at UNSense and tech company founded by Studio, UNSense develops an adaptive neighborhood of 100 homes in Brainport Smart District, Helmond. The neighborhood is aiming at testing an alternative and fair economic model in which the residents themselves benefit from the exchange of their data. So this is something that in our conference is really key. How are we going to value our data? How are we going to exchange our data? In addition, Hans is a research affiliate of the Augmented Environments Lab at Georgia Tech and an independent advisor to various media companies. So with that said, there's so much to say about the amazing panels that we have today, but I'm so excited to hear from my colleagues in the space, and I'm hoping that we have lots of questions, so please go ahead and be able to post those questions, and we'll be looking out for them. So Joe, please, if you want to say something that I missed, introduce yourself, and we're looking forward to getting started with your panel.
Great. Let's get started. Let me share the screen here and hit the play button, I think. There you go. Well, thank you for joining us. And today I'd like to evaluate the possibility that urban villages are the missing governance unit in today's society, and the possibility that today's urban experience is missing a physical framework that would support community life. To be healthy, urban villages must be open to future generations' dreams. And we think this kind of organization both needs and will induce more open governance. It may seem odd that an architect is interested in governance, but my name is Joe Lambke, and for me, life started as a suburban Midwest American kid. Yet at the beginning, something just didn't seem right. Even when I attended architecture school, something was amiss. When most people hear Chicago school, they think of these people. But before them, Chicago school referred to an 1890s style of architecture. And that style fed into Mies van der Rohe's International Modernism. It became clear from that legacy that Chicago was the quintessential 20th century city because it embodied the significant concerns of that past century. More than architecture and more than Milton Friedman, 20th century Chicago was linearly ordered and full of invisible hands and physical repetition. A less rational world would become visible when I was teaching community development courses in Italy, living as a visitor in a medieval village. The high contrast of well-defined boundaries and active centers in these villages was a clear example of a more complex, fluid, and natural kind of order, an order that emerged in time. Definitely less rational, a bit more human, and just like yoga, it was highly centered. This dynamic between boundaries, life, centers became visible years later when we opened a Portland office, and the fertile soil and volcanic countryside contributed to the development of the Kid Cities mechanism for urban design and the Infinite Transit Flyway, a metropolis-wide advanced transportation system seen here. Portland's complicated transit infrastructure renewed the challenge to build a polycentric network of multi-scaled places. Then we encountered Radical Markets, the book introducing the common ownership self-assessed tax and quadratic voting. And with these, we felt we had the open governance strategy suitable to the challenge of building these ideas. So 4 years, a pandemic, anti-violence riots later, it is obvious that urban governance needs better feedback from the smallest organizational levels. But what happened to that old village life? We think it wilted like a flower. How did it happen? We think it was circumstance, not intentions. In plant life, time grows over things, promoting decay. And the mushroom theory occasionally squeezes a little more life from something discarded. In social life, people lose long-term inspiration and novelty wins out. And I don't mean to be misunderstood, because novelty can be enjoyable, and yet also sometimes quite sad as inspiration. Urban life became drained of inspiration. So let's review some factors that strangled village life in large metropolises. Villages were all the rage until 300 years ago. As the Africans knew, in village life, children were integrated. All that changed as the Industrial Revolution introduced many new phenomena to plant life, animal life, human life, and social life. By the 1900s, pollution and danger escalated to a point where cities became unhealthy places to raise children. The solution by the second half of the 20th century was to raise children in a highly extractive and resource-intensive economy, which was exemplified by an individually owned suburban America. So that was one factor contributing to the decline of village life. The second was religion, or the lack of it. 300 years ago, village life operated according to certain principles. Various religions were designed as social networks to maintain community health. And they shared similar formulas, like thou shall not kill or steal. Since then, civilizations have evolved and science brought us individualized healthcare, technology brought us social control, and villages have diminished. At one point, the European West declared that God is dead. But these phenomena happened everywhere around the world. We have learned too much to go back. We, all human beings, can only move forward with renewed emphasis on community health. It's frightening with today's virus, but even that is not new. On top of industrial pollution and rational life, a worldwide virus killed millions in 1918. Architecturally, with 2020 pandemic hindsight, it is obvious that in the 1920s, an urge for clean international modernism would be highly sought after, and it led to cleaner cities and public health departments. Great so far, but it was accompanied by an unfortunate ideology driving the diminishment of village life. An ideology became embedded in early 20th century city planning. In the 1920s, a post-pandemic Darwinism also brought ideas of control and dominance. Ernest Burgess, also from the University of Chicago, even associated cities with a few ideas about biology. However, his ideas about mobility and urban decay were wrong, or at least used an incomplete analogy. Restricting mobility is particularly irritating. We travel to understand, and like communication, it needs to be openly available. Our research sees urban life as a co-evolutionary process. Human life is shaped by urban form as much as urban form shapes urban life. So mobility creates the feedback which is needed for life to thrive. In any case, it was a complicated century with many inventions. America and Chicago's love affair with technocratic organizational efficiency was thriving in the 1950s. This led to tall buildings dominating the urban core, corporate, single function, single owner buildings. The city built Burgess's single peaked fitness landscape, which later we found out is inflexible to perturbations and prone to stagnation on an evolutionary timescale. Then, like all complex living systems, something unexpected happened. What I find most curious about cities today is the demographic unsustainability of modern metropolises. Look around the world. In 2020, there are very few advanced countries reproducing at replacement rates. And there are fewer villages anywhere to supply cities with another batch of immigrants or millennials. Without putting too fine a brush to it, biology would call this a disease. We think today's challenges are to design cities that make raising children enjoyable in an environment with less consumption, of course, and a richer experience. And that requires understanding village life. Chicago is still proud of its Picasso, but one of the unintended side effects of zoning by functions dominance was the abandoned core on the weekends and daily commuting out of the city. Art was not the problem. There were no people because the central business district did not allow people to live there. Finally, in 2005, Chicago changed their zoning law to allow residential uses in the downtown district. The Metropolitan Planning Council today highlights without irony, saying, despite Chicago as a whole losing 200,000 residents in 10 years, the downtown core gained 10,000 people. So the zoning changed the dynamics, but not the survivability. Zoning's dominant, maybe even Darwinian ideology had other effects. And integrated village life was unintentionally segmented out of existence. It began with single function buildings and evolved into market segmented developments, from active lifestyle apartments to family homes and assisted living developments. So zoning by function, again, unintentionally assisted corporations to rationalize our lives. And zoning's failure is becoming increasingly apparent because of changing demand. In the core, number one, in the core, more than 50% of the properties are built with special exceptions. So they have to go around zoning laws anyhow. At the periphery, many functional use zones are not used because undesirable land is now declared an opportunity zone. And thirdly, legal challenges to zoning's fundamental purpose are winning in the courts. So zoning, the other thing about zoning is it never really made sense at the level of neighborhoods and villages. Chicago's neighborhoods are less and less ethnically focused. That was an artifact of 19th century European immigration and limited mobility. Today, by contrast, much of the immigration to Chicago is jet-setting multiracial millennials living in micro apartments. Children are few, as is the density per dwelling unit. To maintain a neighborhood brand, top-down strategies are created by outsiders. The city administration claims past ethnic concentrations, like this Puerto Rican flag, or over-the-top dominating claims of a new neighborhood. So the problem with Darwin's theory of domination is there was no creative mechanism. What produced the variability with which Darwin's theory selected from? We think repetitive interactions are the mechanism that allows day-to-day activities to become celebrated and inspired. Hipsters and myself enjoy a well-made cappuccino, but how did this so-called latte art emerge? One origin myth is that it started on old trains in Italy. The baristas making cappuccinos every day on a train with swaying and bumping movements began to notice that instead of a perfectly rational circle, when they poured steamed milk into espresso, they could add a little care to the train's movement and produce beautifully ordered patterns. So in many subtle ways, zoning reduced urban life's main attribute, an inspired spirit. What we need to know now is how inspired actions will emerge at every level of a 21st century metropolis. This levels of organization diagram is from Animate's Kid Cities mechanism. Today's focus is level 1, urban villages. We see urban villages emerging everywhere, inside second-tier cities, and many will happen inside huge buildings within megacities. These 7 levels are highly coordinated with many different kinds of human activities, from transportation technology to healthcare delivery models. They even correlate to a child's education and the progressive distance a child travels from home as they increase in age. So urban villages may have as few as 100 people or more than 500 people, but the numbers are wide-ranging. Less consumptive, more creative, urban villages don't need much retail. In a consumption-based economy, village life became visible when purchasing small items at mom-and-pop shops. And retail became a way for city planners to say there will be people in this area. When people didn't show up, sometimes the city planners added statues, imitating the planner's wish. But we know desire leads people, and many people, at least sometimes, are searching for smaller, less frenetic experiences. Proof of this desire is the tourist industry concocting village-like vacation venues. Another village-like phenomenon is the resurgence and popularity of farmers markets, which is again about desire. People are seeking human interactions without the dominating or mediating influence of large-scaled entities, whether those are government or corporate. These village-like experiences are emerging in cities. in very large cities. And similarly, governance can happen in smaller ways. The US doesn't even need to test or prototype. We could simply adopt the Japanese police box system, a village-scaled way to interact, serve, and assist the community is urgently needed. Locating these in the center of activity is essential to a high-quality community service. The direct parallel would be a doorman or concierge in a high-rise residential building. So let's look at these phenomena in larger scale environments before we go to some new phenomena. In China, where everything is bigger, the speed of transformation has yielded to many of the same dominance problems, slightly updated, but frequently based on the old 1920s model. Some residential compounds do add distinct scaled respite from their megacities. However, as my collaborator Jailing Liu notes, inside compounds that cater to automobile users, life is still isolating. Children are still lonely. There is no active center, there is no smaller village life, and few mixed community spaces. We think adding village-scaled features would bring greater social and economic resilience to these places. And we do see mixed function physical organization happening in Germany. This particular project has a single owner and has single-use buildings, but the collection of buildings have mixed functions at the neighborhood scale of level 2. And we can go up another level to a larger project at level 3. In Singapore is a primarily residential project, single owner. And here we begin to see the multiple scaled physical delineations of village, neighborhood, and the building itself as a district at level 3. However, there remains a distinctly human challenge with urban villages, a caution in our speedy and digitized world. Urban villages have the potential to be inspired and open, or exclusive and doctrinaire. Like human life itself, it often switches instantaneously. Václav Havel addressed this delicate tribal balance of human judgment. In 1999, after the Czech national team won a hockey tournament, an ugly incident occurred when supposedly celebrating, hooligans beat up some immigrants. Havel suggested that we be vigilant in our sensibility to hidden conceit in others and ourselves, that we be vigilant in recognition of the meaning of things, in perspectives by gaining distance, in gratitude for the gift of life, and be vigilant in our courage to assume the responsibility for life. Designing with these values, physical space can increase the chance for people to understand others, providing more comfortable places from which creativity and experimentation can flourish. Keeping these ideas in mind, let's go to today's villages and see what's possible. In 2009, Animate helped this rural community convert their 100-year-old jail into a community center and grist mill. It happened because the community supported new business initiatives of any kind of use. Yuan Eng's book describes how to create markets and initiate trading in ways that build communities. It matches what happened when they built this grist mill. The community avoided complications to get this building operating. The book clarifies that once market activities are working, businesses are up and running, then negotiations are used to manage the commons. Only after markets are thriving are negotiations proposed to ensure community health. Her main point is that vibrant economic activity is a contributor to community health. More recently, in 2018, Rem Koolhaas began studying agricultural communities to understand what is going on out there. They uncovered Lujiang, a mixed community village, which speaks inadvertently to a village's relationship to the larger economy. No matter how diverse community functions are, even with communist ideals, they can't exist without integration into larger economic structures. And this spring, Animate began the design and construction for this mixed community project. In only 50,000 square feet and 10 stories, this building includes most functions shown on zoning maps: governance, manufacturing, residential, educational, commercial, business, and recreational space. The building developer is linked to the wider New England economy, and they are looking to use new governance tools such as SALSA and quadratic voting to negotiate the interactions between functions in a small project. Again, from UN's book, transaction costs need to be minimal, and reducing friction with simplicity is necessary to get organizations up and running, serving the community needs first. One current sketch includes ownership of the governance operating at 3 levels. The project developer owns the shell and core, elevators, stairs, utilities, and manages the overall maintenance issue. Another third of equity inside at a smaller level, the building occupants own licenses and manage their issues through quadratic voting. And then outside at a larger level, the town also owns equity, giving it influence when needed without a zoning ordinance or other inflexible mechanisms. But the key point is that most issues can be resolved within 3 levels of ownership. So that's where this 1/3 equity idea comes from. So then we begin to ask ourselves, can this local equity idea work at a larger scale? Or rephrased, at what point and how does a local governance structure begin to influence the intellectual life, the inspired life of the residents? Wesley Willis was a street artist in Chicago in the 1980s who grew up in Chicago's South Side housing projects. This truly was his world. By crossing the street into our architectural campus, he gained a few more drawing tools. Eventually, he even went downtown. But this image of the Dan Ryan Expressway was his iconic terrain. In his short life, there was no village to support his eccentric ways. A random kid in a dominant, maybe too open city. We are proposing more local equity in an open governance system without zoning laws, where the local equity is used to influence the negotiation of impact on community health. And it might look like this literal interpretation of a neighborhood filled with urban villages stacked up in downtown Chicago with overlapping levels of ownership. This building, or 1/3, is owned by the developer and it's a neighborhood. Inside, 1/3 is owned by each village via the license holders. And outside, 1/3 equity is owned by the city via the downtown district that this building is located in. Animate and Miglin Properties are in the midst of proposing this reinvented high-rise to Chicago. The proposal is due in January 2021. If you're interested, definitely let us know. But to put this building in context, once we build this building, its entity will exist at level 2, the neighborhood. The Loop District at level 3 still cares strongly about this building's success, which is why it should hold equity. However, the Metropolis at level 5, this building is not a big deal. They have other issues to worry about. Nor is the building a big concern to most people in the tens of other level 4 surrounding cities. However, people in the building or our leaseholders care strongly. So again, most frequently, issues will resolve themselves within 3 levels of organization. The level of attention, and then 1 level up and 1 level down. For more abstract issues transcending many levels, the network effect of many leaseholders across the metropolis can be coordinated if a network of common issues is maintained. Essentially, the more villages that operate, the more network power they obtain. And a few more particulars about this building. In addition to all of the functions included in the previous mixed community project, these villages are larger at 75,000 square feet and include agriculture as well. In an amazing display of human ingenuity, these greenhouses will eliminate the need for 40 acres of farmland so we can feed more people and free up that distant land for better uses. Will Chicago consider such a proposal without the confines of archaic zoning regulations and with the collaborative spirit of local equity? The time has come and we definitely need alternatives. So to wrap up and participate in the rest of the conference, we shared a story about living in this neighborhood of urban villages with Jennifer Marone's work on the scheme of things. The story is titled Hey Kid and describes 7 imaginary days in the life of a kid living in one urban village in downtown Chicagoland. We hope you like it. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Joe. Very inspiring. As a former vice chair of the Zoning Code Commission of Philadelphia, believe me, I wish we would do away with the zoning code.
It's a very difficult challenge. Yes.
It was literally, wow, Bacon, Commissioner Bacon, back in the 60s, and we were 700 pages, and every neighborhood thought that they were the zoning king, and that they had the zoning reigns of their particular neighborhood. It was tough. I mean, I had threats, every night that I was going to go away.
Very
with
tough.
Zoning. Yeah. But it's fascinating. But those are some of the archaic models that we really need to get rid of, because they're obstacles, right?
Yes.
So thanks for that. We're gonna have questions after our the next 2 presentations. So we're lining up those questions up. But Renato, tudo bom? Are we ready?
Olá, yes, I'm ready. Hi, tudo bom?
Tudo bem.
Are you seeing me? Is it okay? I'll share my presentation here. I hope it works.
It's working.
Yes, you see it at full screen because I don't see it.
No, you have to put a full screen. Click on the full screen, because right now it's in your laptop. Perfect, right there.
Thank you so much. Well, I'd like to thank so much the organization of this amazing conference. I've been watching some of the presentations until now, and I'm really excited and deeply honored to be a part of it. I do recognize many of the things that myself, among a group that's growing more and more large here in São Paulo, which is the largest city of Brazil, that's experimenting with the radically new way of carving out urban property. And I want to share this story with you. This is the story of FICA. FICA is an acronym, and it stands for Fundo Imobiliário Comunitário para Aluguel, which means Community Real Estate Fund for Rental, which is also, FICA is also a word that in Portuguese means to stay. And this is the idea, to keep people in good locations, paying very low rents in the downtown areas of our big cities. So I, instead of making big analysis, I carved out a very simple presentation that just tells our story. How did we address some issues, and what are the solutions that we are carving out in a very piecemeal basis. Our context in Brazil is about a very traditional division of property rights. We don't have non-profits that are focused on rental housing. We don't have housing associations such as the ones that you have in different countries, including America, and neither foundations focused on social housing, which is the case in countries like Switzerland or Germany that have several of them. And we have also no national or regional policies for social rent. We just, the housing policies that we have, and in the last year we have had some massive policies. They are all based on private property, which are very problematic, because these are all public subsidies that are making more and more private property that in some years will be in the property real estate market and will become very soon speculative property. We have social movements for housing that demand public policies, and we have NGOs that support these social movements for technical assistance. We also have a very small experience of a social housing policies based upon rental in our city, São Paulo, which I'm not talking about it. It exists in a very pilot scale. And we have lots of progressive urban planners that are activists as well, that are denouncing gentrification, land speculation, evictions of poor people, and eternally increasing prices of real estate and housing for poor people, which is something not that different than what you experiment in the different countries. But what happens normally is that the demands for alternative policies to property rights, to real estate private property, are always oriented towards the state. And a small group of people that were in the beginning not more than 10 or 15 people start gathering in 2015, 5 years ago. We wanted to do something different, not just demand things from the state, but starting to experiment something that we ourselves could do. Instead of demanding, we wanted to offer the state, our society, some solutions rather than demand or denounce solutions from other social actors to which we did not have access. And even if it would be in a micro scale. And our response was to build an association. We have built an association. It was established in 2017 officially, and it is called officially the Community Property Association, and it runs a real estate fund, which is the first real estate fund in our country that runs not for profit, that's against speculation. So every penny that we pour in our real estate fund will go against the market. It protects land from speculation, ensures social justice, seeks diversity. It acquires real estate in the market in order to make it accessible to people for a fair and speculative price, and it helps to build alternative models of property to the traditional real estate markets. And how do we do it? We have a very radical mission, which is like hacking the property markets in our country and offering non-speculative housing for low-income people in very good quality housing, very good location. But in very many aspects, we work very traditionally because we wanted to do something with the legal framework that exists. We wanted to use, and we have very good legal advisors that advised us that we should build an association. Optimal model would be to build a foundation, but foundation is a very heavy institution. It has many legal requirements, and it's very expensive to run. And we had nothing. We didn't have money. We just had good ideas when we began. So we started as an association. If we thrive, we want to become a foundation because we see a foundation as a legal structure that's better to hold real estate property than an association, which is not that stable as an institution. But this idea of making things like here and now, what's possible to do right now, step by step, in a very pragmatic way, is in our DNA, and it's very important for us. So we have an association which has a team of a board of directors, which is all voluntary, except Bianca Antunes, which is a general coordinator. And this is the only paid position in our association, except for some working groups that we can establish with professional advice. And also, you don't have to read it. We have a whole group of supporting members, which are people that pay every month so that we exist. and are also associates. The supporting members are the ones who are associates of us. They are able to elect the directory board, they participate in the annual assemblies of associate and so on. And we have surprisingly a bunch of people that are simply supporters. They don't want to be associate, they don't want to work with us, they just want us to exist. And they contribute from a very small amounts to reasonably large amounts so that we exist and so that we can collect money so that we buy real estate and use it for non-speculative purposes. Since 2017, we have a crowdfunding, which is there. You can support us as well, where people can make monthly contributions. This, our website, www.fundofica.org, is bilingual. You can read it in Portuguese or in English. And we also accept donations in cryptocurrency until the end of this conference. If you want to email us, and we can give you the link for donations in Bitcoins or Ethereum, and they will be really welcome. And we assure that they will be very well used. And we have also a crowdfunding platform in the US through Brazil Foundation, which is the NGO that redirects foundation grants for Brazilian institutions. To our surprise, we wanted to start, we had no money, we had nothing. We started to make some dinners where people donated some money, they pour money in a purse, and surprisingly, some of our early supporters, they wanted to really make this project work. And a couple of sponsors bought an apartment for us, and they made the concession to FICA so that we could experiment our model. And we also started the crowdfunding for the buying of the second apartment. This is how our first flat looked like when we bought it. It was not in a very good shape, but to our luck, the International Biennial of Architecture in São Paulo was running at that moment in September 2017, and we made a small exhibition in the apartment showcasing us. We were explaining how our project should work, and it was a really good start for our project. We had new associates, new supporters, media coverage, and so on. And it's been a very interesting experience to participate in these architectural exhibitions that sometimes are very criticized. People say that they don't have effective, good real effects, but in our case, it was really effective. Then also in 2017, we painted the apartment like a studio. We made a video, it's all in our website, and we started in a collective way the process of understanding how should we select our first tenant. We don't have the time for it, but if you want to contact me, we can give you in the details. The idea was to give priority to women. We had people to have a certain income because we are not a state. We can charge very small rent, but no rent was not possible for us. People should work in downtown, and we started to personify who would be the first tenant. We started to talk with institutions that are also devoted to social housing in downtown areas. They made short lists, and we interviewed the people with the professional advice, and we wanted to make it at the same time. It was very strategic for us because we had just one flat, but at the same time it had to be like technical and impersonal. And it's been a really great experience. We can charge very low rent, below 50% of the price, basically because all the money that's donated to us is it's not lent to us. People lose the money. These are grants and donations and not investments. And in 2019, we selected the first tenant. We had lots of time spent thinking about how do we make a contract. First family moved, and we started monitoring the first family. And it was a family that had some income, but they were living in a tenement house that was in a very, very derelict situation with health problems and so on. And we are monitoring the impact of the housing in this first family, and it's immediate and multidimensional. For example, this girl that's that is being represented, this is Maria Eduarda. She was 4 years old when they moved, and they moved during the child's holidays. In the 1st of August, when they returned home, the principal of the school called Mariana, the mother, and asked, "Did you move? Do you have a new house?" And Mariana said, "Yes, we moved." "How do you know that?" "We know it because Maria Eduarda, this girl of 4 years old, she's bragging around about her new house. She's describing, she's gave us the address already. She's even setting up a pajama party in the apartment. This all in one day from a girl that's 4 years old. And it was really very surprising and very moving for us to understand how deep and multidimensional it was for such a young child, the perception that she moved finally to a decent house for the first time ever in the family. And I could keep telling you stories about how the kids' health has improved, about how the family finally has a place where they gather on Sundays. And Marianne is very proud to say that on Sundays, the family visit is here at our place. It's really, really very moving and very interesting and very immediate, because housing is really very expensive at our city. And this family had all set up. They had work, they had a good family bonds, but they had no money to afford decent houses, which is the case of millions of people in our society. Much more people that are in this situation than people that are simply homeless in the streets. So this is how the apartment looks like after the renovation. It's really nice. And this is the family: Eudes, Maria Eduarda, and Enzo, the girl, the young boy. Our experience was exhibited, and it's also carefully told in this bilingual book, which is called "What Does an Ethical Landlord Look Like?" We were invited for the Chicago Biennial of Architecture to participate, and we were very happy about it. Our first proposal was, okay, the $40,000 that you could spend in our project in this Biennial of Architecture, what about if you donate us the money and we buy an apartment in São Paulo, and we make São Paulo like the hub of the Chicago Biennial, of our apartment, the São Paulo hub of the Architecture Biennial. Curators loved it, but the board of the Biennial was not very fond of it, because they wanted the Biennial to happen in the Chicago Cultural Center. So we were all thinking about a legacy. We made a very nice exhibition. We are very happy about it, but we used some of the grant to make this book. We sell the book in order to buy more real estate in São Paulo. If you're interested in the book, this is the email. You can email us. I think there's also some books in the hands of the Graham Foundation in Chicago. If you are, by the way, in Chicago or in the US, we can try to make this ends meet. Very important for us, transparency. We have a monthly newsletter that tells about the state of our fund. We have our monthly balance published, so it's all public. It's very important. We deal with people's money, and on a monthly basis, we share the data, how much money we had in the beginning, how much money was donated, how did our investments go, and how much did our structure costs by until now. In every month, every single month since 2017, but one month in which we had lots of costs by the renovation, we could have a surplus. Also very important is to communicate. We have to have a very organic communication with our supporters and with would-be supporters, people that understand that this project is important, they follow us, and at the end of the day, maybe they can donate or cooperate with us somehow. So language is very important, and design, and so on. In 2020, we were surprised about the pandemics, and I could do a whole new presentation about it. We knew that housing, decent housing, was at the core of the problems of the pandemics. Few people in our city have a good housing so that they can make a proper, decent quarantine. And but at the same time, we didn't know. Some people started to say, you have some money in your fund, why don't you donate part of this money for emergency actions? We decided that we should set up a new fund, and some donors started to look for us. They said, listen, you are in this housing field. I rely on you. You are good with money. You are transparent. Why don't I donate you some money and you curate where is this money going for? And then we made a Fica em Casa, which means stay at home emergency fund. To our surprise, people started to pour money into this new fund. We had by now some 200,000 reais in this fund, which is some $50,000. It's really lots of money for our standards, and it's more or less the same money that we have been collecting in 2 years or 3 years for buying new real estate. We could collect money for this emergency situation. So it's been a very interesting experience, and we built a board with people that are our associates, some people that donated money, but many people that did not donate money, so that we decide where is this money going to. And one of the criteria is we want to support smaller projects where the big donations that we have in our country are not reaching, and we also want to make some donations that create a legacy and strengthen our bonds with other institutions and social movements, and it's been a very great and rewarding experience. We do also research. We are mapping what we call ethical landlords, which is institutions that hold property so that they use and mobilize this property for ethical reasons, not for speculative and out of the market reasons. And there's a lot in Brazil. We just have ourselves in this specific field, but in the whole world, there are lots of institutions that are doing similar work. In the Netherlands, maybe 20% of the real estate is in the hand of the housing associations that use it not for speculative real estate market purposes. And it's really very important for us that are so small and so exceptional in Brazil to show our colleagues, also our colleagues in the university, that we are not like a crazy invention from a bunch of people that are idealists, but that this is a kind of a possible situation. We have the case of the Fuggerei in Augsburg, in which a similar organization, which is the Fugger Foundation, holds social housing for 500 years. It started this year, it started in 1520. And they are still charging like €1 of rent for social housing a year or something like this. And it's sustainable, so that these are the cases that are important for us. And in June 2020, how are we? We have around 110 monthly supporters. 60 of them are our associates. They can participate in the institution. We have 7,000 reais, around $1,500 in monthly contributions. Altogether, we have some special contributions as well, not just monthly, but unique contributions. We have 212,000 reais in our fund. When we started the pandemics, we were already in the market, starting to look for the second small apartment in downtown São Paulo, which could be bought for more or less 150,000 reais. But we had to start searching because of the pandemics. We cannot go out in the streets. And now we have more than enough to buy the second apartment, so that we are making already the fundraising for our third apartment, and people keep donating. They are not forgetting us during the pandemics. And the next steps, we are quite excited. We are already in the market, starting to look for more property to buy. We are mapping ethical landlords worldwide, making networking. We are starting a fund for ethical agriculture, because exactly the same institutional framework that works for social housing in downtown areas can work for registering agricultural property. We are starting conversations with LGBT associations that have very problematic housing situations to make a fund, and also starting to talk with people in the market, maybe not just donations, but investments can be run through our institutions. And we are talking also to the local government about public policies, this time not demanding public policies, but offering ourselves as a reliable social actors. If they want, if they carve the proper policies, we can be very good partners to them to make public money more worth in this housing field. Last slide that we have. Well, we have just one apartment, maybe in some months we have 2 apartments. Are we relevant? We think we are very relevant, because even in a very, very small scale, we are typifying in a radical way a new social actor in Brazilian housing and property policies, which can be translated as a social landlord. Also, we are not thinking as a short-term projects. Processes such as evictions and gentrification, they take decades to establish themselves in our cities. So we need long-term projects that can address these situations. Also, we want very much that other institutions in our country follow our example. We have our tools, our bylaws, our criteria, our contracts, all available, open source, so that please copy us, we say. It wasn't so successful until now. We didn't find a group of people that were brave enough to establish a second institution like ours, but many people that are very, very excited about us. And also, we are sure that the state can make more of its public money if they deal with organizations such as ourselves. We are better in many situations than the public policies that are around. Definitely better than private ownership-based policies, because we take property out of the market, not inside of the market. And also we think that in some circumstances we can be even better than state-owned rental housing. Thank you so much. I'm happy to talk to you in some minutes.
Thank you, Renato. Obrigada a você. Amazing, no? Very entrepreneurial spirit. You know, when you were just speaking, you were doing your pitch and how crazy ideas become something amazing. And what's interesting is that you vindicated it by saying, look, there's crazy people doing this in other countries. And it's all about sharing best practices and what other, disruptive people are doing around the world, lens to be able to change policies. I think that a lot of countries, sometimes they create policies without looking at the experiments that are happening, right? It builds so many more possibilities. If we brought the results, if we brought the ideas, we practically have to put it, and I've been a politician, I've been in this world, you have to practically put it on a silver platter for people. To make it happen. And I think that's going to be hard to change, but at the same time, if we have more folks using our models, then they will know that the citizens actually have been voting on this, have been advocating for this, and this is models that work. So congratulations on that. Excellent. Hans, over to you.
Yes, thank you so much. We were facing some technical difficulties, so Samantha is taking over the screen. I will cue her when she needs to flip the screens, but we will manage from here. Thank you so much for having this opportunity, and good evening to everybody who is listening, and great that you take the time to listen to the presentations of all of us. And I'm honored that the organization of RadicalxChange conference invited me and my colleagues from UNSense to talk about the work we love so much. As already mentioned, my name is Hans Bouwknegt, and I'm a digital strategist at UNSense. And although I am the one doing the presentation tonight, I will talk about the work of many, and therefore I thank my colleagues already in advance for their vision and help in preparing this. And in the 20 minutes that lie ahead of us, I will briefly tell about the challenges we were facing when we launched a plan about 2 years ago to develop a smart neighborhood in the south of the Netherlands. Next slide, please. Yeah. Our story begins about 2 years ago when Instituto, a mother company, which is an internationally renowned studio in architecture and urban design, decided to set up our company, UNSense. UNSense is an architect company that explores the possibilities of integrating advanced technologies into the built environment. Our mission is to see how technology can help to tailor this living environment to the wishes and routines of the residents, the people who live there. Adaptive homes, adaptive buildings, and adaptive cities are our domain. Next slide, please. And in the first year of our existence as a company, we gradually tried to build our own position and our own focus. And we formulated our own approach when it comes to the challenges regarding the development of smart cities. Themes from the European Grand Challenges inspired us. Think of climate change, urbanization, safety, healthy aging, and the inclusive society. We added one challenge ourselves, and that's something that has been with us throughout the projects we do, because we believe that the digitization of services could and should lead to a reallocation of the disposable income of its residents. Digital services should make life cheaper at some expenses. So the basic facilities. But I will talk about that later in my presentation. Next slide, please. And in defining our own voice, we researched many plans and existing projects, and it struck us that we often saw discrepancies between the beautiful visions and plans we read and their actual execution in real life. And some of these discrepancies were so fundamental that we really were wanted, because we saw them as important prerequisites for the development of a smart city. And let me mention just a few. We read a lot about smart cities in which services were user-centered and coordinated, but somehow we saw very few examples in real life. Places with a set of smart services, yes, there were enough of them. But really, a truly integrated smart city where the services were coordinated and where there was a real crossover between those services, they were very few. Second is that we came across terms like inclusive and digital citizenship a lot. But at the same time, we saw that residents of cities or users of services were not digitally included in the exchange at all. We were still, and which is still the case, people of flesh and blood who interact on platforms that are not ours. So the data we generate is in the hands, not of us, but of the ones owning the platforms. And as a result, the residents benefited only a little from the value that was being created. And finally, privacy regulations like GDPR were often used defensively as a checklist, and not, as we hoped, as an approach to engage people and to ask for them informed consent. Next slide, please. Because we wanted to stick with our vision, we decided to make plans to develop a smart neighborhood of 100 homes ourselves. So we really decided, okay, if we need to learn from a smart city, and if it's not there, maybe we should take the initiative and start, of course, with partners, make plans ourselves. In 2019, we conducted extensive research into the feasibility of these thoughts and these plans, and came to the conclusion that our plans were legally, economically, technically, and ethically feasible. One principle is and has always been crucial for us. In the context of a smart neighborhood or a smart city, data will be generated very close to the private environments of residents. Their interests, therefore, should and must be central. In our opinion, residents should be the full stakeholders in a digital exchange of information and value, and they should benefit from these exchanges. I will get into a little bit more detail about that. Next slide, please. The neighborhood we envision will be built in the south of the Netherlands as part of a larger plan, Brainport Smart District. Brainport Smart District involves the construction of 2,000 homes, for which Instituto, our mother company, designs the master plan. The neighborhood is not just a place, but also a research project with academic stakeholders and with clear legal and ethical frameworks. The project form we chose is called a real-life test environment or living lab, which is probably familiar to you. And in our case, the project will run for 2 years. When the first inhabitants move into their homes in 2022, we wish to try and understand step by step how residents, companies, local government, and science jointly shape and use a smart residential area. In order to apply the results and insights from these real-life test settings, as well as possible, we try to have the houses inhabited by a cross-section of the Dutch population. While the 100 Homes project itself will start in 2022, the preparations have already begun. In close cooperations with local governments, also from other cities, with universities, inhabitants from existing neighborhoods, and with businesses, we are developing several smart cities use cases in the domains of energy, food, health, or mobility. And each of these use cases can be used in the new neighborhood when we build a full-fledged smart city part. I will get back to that in later in my presentation. Next slide, please. Since the development of adaptive and smart areas involve a lot of data traffic, we are currently developing a urban data platform. Our focus is, as much as possible, on facilitating a direct and equal exchange between the various stakeholders in the neighborhood or city. And as I mentioned already in these presentations, our principles are important for us. Having looked at many examples, we developed a set of design principles that are fundamental to the platform and for our projects. Let me mention just a few of them separately. First, there is data neutrality. Smart neighborhoods are places with sensors and services in private as well as public spaces. This means that data will come from various sources. And in order to facilitate a crossover between services, it is important that data will be governed in a neutral way. We have seen too many examples where data ends up in the hands of one organization, whether it is commercial or governmental, and that simply doesn't work. Neutral, in our opinion, means that all three stakeholders in the neighborhood should be represented in the body that governs that data. The stakeholders are the local government itself, the inhabitants, and the companies. So together, they should take care of this neutrality, dynamic neutrality of the data. The second is a General Data Protection Regulation, GDPR. Together with a law firm in the Netherlands, we have studied these regulations closely. And GDPR are the European regulations about data and privacy. And let me make myself very clear on this. Our projects are designed with privacy in mind and therefore fully compliant to GDPR regulations. Yet, while studying these regulations with this law firm, we encountered that GDPR could work quite defensively. If you, for instance, completely stay away from digital interactions, then the effect is positive for your privacy, because you would miss all kinds of interactions and even the relevant ones. GDPR, in other words, does not take into account the fact that sophisticated interactions, digital interactions, simply require rich exchanges. taking people away from them or protecting them from that by taking that interaction away does not solve a problem. And therefore, we focused on the strongest instrument we found in GDPR, which is the consent you have to give as an inhabitant for the use of your data. And we took that one step further. We combined the notion of consent with data ownership, the possibility to govern your own data. In current digital exchanges, people do not possess any data. They are, in fact, as I said already, natural persons who, by interacting with services, generate data on the platforms and services of others. All data they generate is therefore gone and it's never theirs. This changes if you would give people a digital identity that they can manage so that they can decide themselves what they would like to share with what kind of service. Via their digital identity, our aim is to give the inhabitants an equal digital position, see it as a digital presence in the exchange of information and value. A company, so to say, among other companies. This digital identity we envisioned is governed by its natural owner, the inhabitant, and managed through an advanced consent dashboard. Ideally, the digital identity acquires attributes and will have an interaction history. This way, interaction with the sensoric world and the digital services can become increasingly sophisticated. The notion of a digital identity has similarities with that of an avatar in games. For that reason, we work with specialists and theorists from the domains of game theory and game design. The combination of consent and digital identity has proven to be a very important backbone of our approach. And it is on those points that we eventually met with people from RadicalxChange community. And we felt we had a common ground on that aspect. Because if you govern your own data and you can exchange that for relevancy or even for value, then the basis of a new market opportunity occurs. And in these conversations, we also found the value of the collectives. And we started to understand and appreciate the strength of the collective and the value of the mediator of individual data, the MID. It's been discussed in books from Graham Will, for example. It was and is something that enriches our proposition. If people can design to open themselves up to service providers, they can also decide to share and exchange data among themselves. This way, a peer-to-peer local economy can come to exist. And the strength of the MID proposition is that it combines the possibilities of an internal market with a strong collective presence towards external stakeholders. Next slide, please. Like I said in the presentation, it's UNSense ambition to reallocate the value of the 100-home ecosystem. And the first step to do that is to neutrally facilitate a direct relation between an inhabitant and a service provider. And since it is the inhabitant herself who can decide what data she wishes to share with what service, the market of data insights will become far more democratic. After all, the local greengrocer, baker, or restaurant can have access to the same information as large platforms currently have. And they can save both the inhabitant and the service provider a lot of money. It is the inhabitant who decides to open up to what kind of services. So you don't need to access people via the platform of large tech firms. The design of the platform encourages inhabitants to collaborate. And currently, UNSense is exploring three aspects. The benefits of this local peer-to-peer market, I will get to that in a second. The benefits of the collective position towards external stakeholders, and the balance between economic and societal benefits. And this way we study and we talk about quadratic voting of a group of people to find a balance and a trade-off between economic, privacy, and also say sustainability and other topics, for example. Next slide, please. In the preparation, and like I said already, in the preparation of this 100 houses project, we are carrying out a number of use cases. And this way, we want to test whether our assumptions do really work in practice. The first use case focuses on the exchange of energy. Unfortunately, we see what we try to develop in a little bit more abstraction comes to life when we apply these thoughts into a use case. Next slide, please. Let me give you a little bit of context about this energy use case, because energy is a very important topic at the moment, pretty much everywhere. The Netherlands, like other countries, is fully engaged in a transition to cleaner energy, generated by windmills and solar panels. This transition is gradual and requires a number of important adjustments. For example, the central energy grid must be organized more dynamically, and it must be better able to absorb peaks and troughs. In the current situation, polluting coal-fired power stations are used at peak times. And to prevent this in the future, it is important to generate as much energy as possible at the edge of the energy grid and also store it locally. This energy can be stored by using smart car charging stations. So in the neighborhoods where you have solar panels and you have cars, you can store and generate energy locally, but also by using neighborhood batteries. The best way to profit from the production of energy from households is to prevent using energy from the central grid at peak times. After all, that's the moment when energy is produced by polluting coal-fired stations. The trick is to arrange a local energy market of supply and demand and store the extra energy at the battery during daytime. So when inhabitants return from home and create a peak in demand by starting to cook, watching television, etc., and do all their things simultaneously, energy from the battery can be used. So instead of using energy from the central grid, they can use energy they have stored themselves in the battery. And these strategies are called peak shaving, and they are very rewarding for the inhabitants of the neighborhood. How does this connect to our vision and to our plan? Well, we have said that the residents in our plans manage their own energy data and they possess their own energy data. We want to give them the opportunity to share energy with each other. The collective plays an important role in this in two ways. On the one hand, the residents' collective forms a local energy market in which neighbors can coordinate their supply and demand. On the other hand, the collective has a strong position towards external parties. This way, they can arrange better prices for their energy and even sell their collective intelligence. We have already spoken with several energy companies that are interested in rates data about use and trade of energy in a neighborhood. Next slide, please. At the moment, we are really stepping towards the first neighborhood, which is a retrofit setting, an existing neighborhood of 1,500 houses, of which 300 have solar panels. We try to connect to the inhabitants who have a solar panel. UNSense will orchestrate development and also to orchestrate the whole project as such. And we use the city to connect to the inhabitants, because in itself, it's a large user test of the platform, of the ability to trade, and whether it's a test, whether these people really understand their effort in trading energy. We think and we hope, and what we see in the first steps is promising, that the people, the inhabitants of these neighborhoods, they are engaged and they see the value of trading energy themselves. And they see how they can get a full position in the exchange of this value. Together with the legal firm who is designing and testing the overarching framework, and with an advanced dashboard in which the inhabitants have a good overview. That's how we set up this whole use case around energy. Next slide, please. This is a more schematic scheme of the flows of value, where you can see on the left how houses are and the ability to produce energy, how that comes together in the collective, represented by the manager of a mediator of individual data. That is for us is a very important aspect of our plan, because we think if this group of inhabitants can organize themselves and represent themselves strongly towards the outside world, they can have a much better position and negotiation position and have more value for the energy they share among themselves. They can sell to the outside world like an energy company or energy provider. The final slide then. So far, our journey has been challenging and rewarding. Our plans attracted quite some attention, varying from some critical articles to increasingly positive coverage and even positive remarks from the Dutch Minister of Interior and Kingdom Relations, as you can see. The ideas from the RadicalxChange community are important to us, and we will keep on implementing them when appropriate. Final slide. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Hans. That was so informative. And it's amazing, right? When we actually let citizens make those decisions, how they value, especially the way we trade, the way we exchange, and what those exchanges mean, right? So we want to go back to those digital identities that will define future design of neighborhoods and cities. And very close to my heart, I used to, be like, how can we keep developing the same cookie cutter type of developments? Why aren't we really looking at alternative energy? Why aren't we looking at ways that we can actually make this a lot more useful to the citizen itself and involve them into the design? So very, very important. I'd like to open it up for questions. I don't know if the panelists have questions for each other. I have a couple of questions from the audience. But before we go to the audience questions, are there any remarks or any comments that you would like to share, or based on what we've heard in this discussion?
Want to become a living lab as well at FICA. So this is a comment. We are already inspired about it, and we are taking notes about how can we get officially into being a living lab, if it's possible.
I find your presentation as well fascinating. And like I said in before, living lab, you can start it often by collaborating with universities. And of course, you have to have the right legal and ethical constraints and frameworks at place. But I think it's very important that we start to try and find ways to really engage audience and make them part of this digital exchange. Because at the moment, somehow we are still outside this relevant exchange for us. We should be a solid part of the exchange of value and information and the exchange of data. And somehow it's still lacking. And I think we miss a lot of opportunities. And especially in the domain of smart cities, where data is being generated so closely to your private atmosphere. I think we should have people decide to what they want to share, to whom, and really give them that place, that central place that they deserve, actually.
Very nice. So just internally speaking from our side, I mean, we can talk about how we can improve, and this is the things that you've been doing in order for us to improve the aspects of our cities and urban societies and everything. But a big question, who stands to benefit from reforming these mechanisms the most, right? I know that we talk a lot about folks that don't have the means to be able to afford, apartments, who don't understand the value of their data, that maybe they'll be able to make any, contributions and be able to benefit from it. So, who stands to benefit from them? Who will be maybe even harmed disproportionately from them? I mean, there's so many variables here. A lot of folks always say, well, you're rocking the boat. We have a good system. It's not working. It's not perfect, but it works. So what are those benefits, right? I mean, who exactly, and who will not be able to benefit from these?
I think, Renato, could you speak more about the selection process? How you select your tenants? I think that's a very interesting aspect of your work, because it relates to this who benefits idea. So what are some of the key factors that how you select people?
Well, we took over 1 year in carving out the selection process, and it was lots of assemblies, and it was lots of decisions collectively made about how would we do this. I have showed you an image of one of the first workshops that we were doing collectively to understand this. First, we needed a family that had some income. We knew that we wanted to make a low rent, but we could not subsidize the family, because the donations that go to our institutions are not subsidies for the family. They are donations to buy more real estate. So this created already a certain income, which in Brazil it's more or less 2 minimum wages, which takes lots of people out of our goal. At one aspect, it was frustrating to us, because we wanted to serve poor people, but at the other hand, we understood who can our model reach, which is low income that are minimally inserted in the working system. They have to have work. So two people in the same household earning 1 minimum wage, which is very, very low payment, is the minimum formal payment, they can afford our apartment and pay less than 30% of their income in rent, which is the international standard for a non-abusive rent. Then we knew the woman would be the protagonist of the rent. It could be a married woman, a transsexual woman, a lesbian, a heterosexual, anything concerning gender and sexual identity, but we wanted to deal with a woman, because every possible research shows that the woman gives stability to the household. It would be very important for us that kids were around, because if you are 4 years old and you are growing in a decent housing situation, it builds a notion of human rights, which is different from being abused in housing rights continually. And this was our biggest surprise, how conscious children are of their new situation at a very, very young age. Then people should work in downtown. And then the fourth or fifth criteria was we would not make an open call, because we would be overflown of applications we would frustrate everybody. So we would work with institutions that work closely with us, that we rely that these people are appointing the right candidates. We would make a short list, and then with the advice of a psychologist and a social assistant, we would make a ranking first, second, third, fourth, and fifth. So it's all told in our booklet.
Wonderful.
It's interesting because for Hans, you don't want a selection process. You want everybody's to participate. It's a different scenario.
Yeah, ideally so. And I think, and that's of course is a challenge, that you also wish to engage weaker areas of society. But I think for us, the question has been quite principled. Could you make smart cities if people are not really fully positioned to benefit from the data they generate? And I think you cannot build these environments if residents are not in full control. And that has been a very key element in everything that we did and we do. Otherwise, we see that a lot, then you get a set of services that are relatively safe and relatively isolated from each other. They do something smart with the city. But the closer you get to the inhabitant, you have to ask the inhabitant, okay, what do you want to do? Under what conditions will you show yourself, etc. So it struck us that we had to solve this very principal element for us in order to progress and make solid plans.
Wonderful. So I have a question from the audience, which is, what would a legal strategy look like to dismantle and replace current zoning laws? I mean, we have zoning differently in different countries around the world, but I think, Joe, would what type of strategy do you think we have to? I mean, I think get rid of all of the zoning type of entities that we have, but I know we can't do that because we're so just completely lacking in innovation in that.
Well, I think that's what is exciting about the couple of projects we're working on, is that we can start in an area where the community is not using zoning ordinances. So we can demonstrate what that produces. So that mixed community project that we showed you, 50,000 square feet, they have the support of the community. There is no zoning that we need to abide by. So we could take that to other places, to other municipalities that do have zoning, and say, hey, look, this is what works here, and this is why it works. Let's see how we can implement something in your community, because you too want that economic vitality that these kinds of projects produce. And I think the other thing is that, and it's difficult, but not too difficult. It's like, there is this community, the equity portion. I mean, very often cities, large cities, want to improve their image or a particular piece of land they have. Maybe it used to be the Department of Streets and Sanitation, and now somebody else, now that's been vacated. They don't know what to do with it. They've sat on it for a couple of years, but they know it has value. And so the point is, we can say, look, let us build on your property, keep your equity, keep your voting rights in the project. You can put stipulations onto the project if you think, for whatever city needs, a city might have certain needs, we can incorporate those into the project. So it's I'm sure you're familiar with the public-private partnership. So it's a little bit like that, but I would want it to be more true equity, financial equity in the project, and then more importantly, the quadratic voting equity as the project goes into the future. You want them to become an interested, active partner of the project going forward.
And that's a great point, leading to another question from the audience. So regarding quadratic voting, how do these, three types of shareholders find consensus, right? So we have three different types of approaches, but where do we find that consensus, that point, that middle point that we can all agree on, that we need to move forward? We all have to take a step at a time. We can't just convert everything, which is as much as I wish we could do quadratic voting immediately. But where do we start, right?
Well, so if the again with that mixed community project, there's 27 spaces in the building. Some are very small, and obviously some are larger. But each space has a value assigned to it, and through the cost or a salsa kind of arrangement. Each space has a value. If the space is small, its value is smaller, which means they have fewer voting rights. And then the point is that the town has voting rights on every issue inside the project, but for many issues, they don't care. They're not going to use their voting rights. They're going to use their voting rights for something that matters to the town. So the point is we're distributing voting rights through the value so that the 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 equity position translates to voting rights in the quadratic voting system. Did that help?
Renato? Yeah, that's very helpful, I think. And it's all about, helping folks understand, right, these models and how it applies to them. And it's not, it's not rocket science. It's actually what I love about it. It's simple to the point, and it makes a lot of sense in the long term.
Right. I think there's something interesting about value. How is value assigned? So the cost, common ownership, self-assessed tax, the value is assigned by the leaseholder. So if you're going to occupy a space in the building, you set the value. You say, I think this space is worth X. And I'm that was a little bit what prompted my question about Renato's system is they're determining the value of the tenant. And so I'm wondering if there's a way to make that more open. How we assess value. I mean, this is what creating a marketplace does. Once you get a marketplace going and trading begins to happen, then you can see the value. Oftentimes, maybe for a bunch of reasons, maybe there's only one thing available, or doesn't change hands frequently enough. And that's another example of it's difficult to have a market if things aren't changing hands frequently enough. And so it all comes down to assessing value. And so in Renato's example, with the child and everything, like one of my first thoughts as he was talking about it was, are there emergency programs? What if this woman and her daughter needed emergency housing for a year, and she had a plan, and maybe she was going to try to get herself out of a hole and find a new place? But those are different ways to assign value to the tenant.
I'm kind of familiar with the idea of auctioning real estate, but in our case, we are dealing with money that has been donated. It's philanthropic money. People would not, in Brazil at least, be not very happy if we took this money, bought real estate, and then auctioned hand. They want to do good. They want it to make it as socially progressive as possible and redistributive. Maybe we are really thinking about how to make an impact investment. If we make a second fund with the idea of investment, then maybe we can deal with this other dynamics. But for the current fund, I am quite sure that our supporters, our sponsors would not be very happy with an auction.
It's interesting, right? Because, you know, and I love your question, Joe, because we, in the US, for example, but anywhere or many places, your credit score. So you're being scored financially by, you know, some things that you probably, you know, didn't mean to do, and you're trying to fix that. What's the score? I mean, how do you choose, you know, how do we go away from that and value people for the right actions that they have done, right? For the efforts, for being able to get out of certain situations, for their contribution to, you know, I'm gonna, you know, getting 100% renewable energy, using that, you know, their social contributions in volunteering. I mean, how do we keep evaluating people with something so rudimentary like a credit score? So it seems really unfair. So, you know, those are the questions that we think that we should always try and raise. Hans, you're a little quiet over there. Are there any, you know, things that you that have jumped out at you from this discussion? I know that there's a lot of, you know, questions relating. How do we, you know, what are the type? How did you get started to think about these models, and what drove you, for example, to say, hey, we're not going to do the same design, the same development as the rest of the developers. We're going to go ahead and take this crazy idea and really go with it.
Well, it has been more than a crazy idea, but we started to look at things quite logically, actually. And I think in my occupation as professor also in the Netherlands, in an earlier phase already, we explored what it would mean if people would as much possess the data that they share with service providers. And I think it has been a strategy that is coming more into focus currently, fortunately so, especially in the Netherlands when it comes to healthcare, but I think that's internationally, when now that digital services are embracing our lives and getting to the vulnerable spots of our private lives as well. The current exchange models, they simply don't stand. And that's the insight that we took in developing our plans for smarter cities. And well, we have done, of course, a lot of talks with a lot of cities, and we continuously encounter the same kinds of problems. What happens if we set our public space open and a commercial party comes in, takes all the data away, and where do we stand? So the awareness that things need to be managed differently is far more widespread and is setting in much bigger. And I think it's fortunate because we were on a route, we encountered people from RadicalxChange, and we immediately had a meeting ground, because the idea is quite similar. Whether you take it from a very privacy aspect, or maybe for the angle that you need to profit more from the data that you generate, I think it is quite similar. It is being a solid partner in the exchange of value that simply exists when there's a digital entity versus a digital entity. And now we simply give our data away to the one who owns the platform. And it doesn't make sense.
No, it doesn't, which is where we have started to really realize that, right? Where does it make sense stop, and where does it begin? And what is the framework, right? What is it that we need to do in order for societies to adopt this? And we had another question from the audience, regarding rural communities, right? So is there anything stopping us from forming a rural community with these principles and grading it over time? From my experience, when we've done, built bedroom communities outside cities, and how our second and third tier areas are starting to eat up all this rural farming land and developing in a way that, taking over our green areas instead of investing more in cities, right? Or making sure that they're really highly dense But the rural community is key. Sometimes we tend to forget them. We tend to say, oh, well, they're farther away, they're not as dense, maybe they have a bigger voice. But with our recent elections, it turns out it's very important for us to look at everyone, all these communities as well. Something that we really need to empower our rural community sisters. So love to hear some perspective from you all.
Very
Quite
righteous
interesting.
comments. Yeah.
It's quite interesting. We started with very inner city social housing, and soon, at more or less the same time, we ourselves realized that our property model can also be applied to rural areas. Instead of preserving low-income rental housing, we can preserve environment, food production, water production, and so on. And people who are struggling for healthy rural communities, in our cases, they discovered us at the same time. So that right now we are carving out a fund for agricultural users that preserve the health of soil, that don't use agrotoxics. I'm not sure if the word in English is agrotoxics. In Portuguese, it's agrotoxics.
We get it.
Get it, okay. And what's interesting in our case is that it's pretty similar as a property model. You have to purchase it, you have to register it in a notary in the name of one institution, which is non-profit and non-speculative, that makes a further contract with the one who is using the land and holding it, if possible, in perpetuity. It's the same.
That's a good point. Right now, there's a lot of different projects looking at, how do we reduce poverty and how do we reduce in agriculture areas, right? And that talks to the fact that we need to figure out housing and smarter ways to provide that. We can't just take care of a farmer, but we need to take care of the entire ecosystem of the agriculture infrastructure. Any other points on that?
I have a question for Hans.
Sure.
Is there what data is most valuable from communities, number one? And related to that, is it different, the kind of data you would get from a rural community, let's say, versus a huge district in a city? So a district or a small village in a city versus a rural town. Are there kinds of data that are more and less valuable in those kind of situations?
Oh, it's an intriguing question, I have to say. I think, well, we don't have the answers yet on what data is most valuable in terms of money, of course. And I think there is always an extra value to it, also a societal value to it. And that's where we think that the balance also of quadratic voting comes into play. So I think what we would like to do is monitor and really see what is happening so that we have the figures of what people value, because it's also what the collective value is most important, how that is being pronounced by the group itself. And whether there's a comparison between a rural domain, I think the notion of inclusion here is being valued as citizen and being appreciated, included into this whole framework of thinking and system of exchange. That I think is very, very important, maybe even more important for rural areas than in larger cities. So I think giving it in that dimension, data in rural domains might be of greater value even than we anticipate now. It's a little bit a slight answer, but it's difficult to really point at what kind of value you mean then. And I think there's a lot to it.
Great. We're reaching that mark to end our wonderful conversation. Really want to highlight everything that you all have done, and let's. I know that this is going to be recorded, and we're going to go ahead and continue to have these conversations. But this is just the beginning. I just want to keep in mind that to everyone that when we look at young engineers and architects and planners, seeing what they can try to do to maximize their positive impact in the world is key. So I always think, how do we inspire the next generation, those kids, right, to think about how we can make certain changes around the world. So looking at our younger generation is key. So thank you again, Hans, Jill, Renato. Obrigado você. Thank you. Thank you. Gracias. And merci. And around the world, thank you for chiming in and being supportive. Have a great rest of the conference, and we look forward to hearing more about you.
Cheers.
Okay.
Cheers.